Hello, Phoenix women. Thank you so much for joining me. I am looking forward to spending this next little bit of time with you to share with you my journey, my experience, my story, and most importantly, the lessons that I've learned, the things that I've gained through my story, so that it can hopefully shape and change your story so that you can live a life that you love. So I am Kelly Nielsen. I am the grief guru. Before we get started, I want to just encourage you to find a comfortable place to relax, be present, be available. Grab a cup of coffee if you need it, or tea, or whatever it is. I'm not sure what time it is that you're watching this, but I just want to encourage you to get comfortable, have a notebook and a pen available. I am going to be giving you some things that hopefully you'll want to take notes on. I'll also be giving you some instructions and asking some questions that you're going to want to answer maybe when you're done watching the video. So if you have your notebook ready, your pen ready, your coffee or tea ready, let's begin. So as I mentioned, my name is Kelly Nielsen and I am the grief guru. Now, nobody grows up wanting to be the grief guru. It's not something when I was a little girl that I hoped and dreamed I would become, but as life threw things at me, I had the opportunity to deal with grief on so many levels. Growing up, I experienced sexual abuse at age 12. I became an unwed mother at age 19. I experienced an abusive first marriage that resulted in divorce. Later, I was diagnosed with cancer and went through a bankruptcy. I had my fair share of adversity before I hit age 40. But it was actually at age 40 that I hit what I like to call the Super Bowl of grief in my own personal life. See, my mom committed suicide on February 1st of 2017. And that event shattered our family and shook me to my core. It had me questioning everything, questioning my faith, questioning my upbringing. Up was down, down was up. I like to describe it in a way that grief came in like a flood and it took me out to sea. For several months, I was barely able to function. I was exhausted. I was confused. I was obsessed with trying to find answers. I just was going around and round in circles. I tried to find help in traditional methods and went to a suicide support group. And I was horrified, actually, to find that the majority of people, if not all the people in that support group, were experiencing the same level of difficulty that I was experiencing, but the one big difference is everybody in that group, it had been several months or years since their loved one passed away to suicide, and they weren't really any better than when it very first happened. And that was very scary for me. I began to give up hope that I would ever recover. I just was like, I guess this is, the new normal. I'm just going to learn to be sad for the rest of my life. And I had started to settle into that routine when I went to an event and heard a speaker that forever changed my life. I heard this brave, amazing woman named Immaculée share her story of surviving the Rwandan genocide. She shared in horrific detail about living in a bathroom for 90 days with 8 other women where she heard literally everyone she had ever known be killed around her. They were airing it on the radio. She heard her entire family be killed in the village next door. She shared how she not only survived that event, but about the healing process afterwards, where she walked through forgiveness, she walked through the grief, she walked through the pain to get back to a place of peace and joy. And I saw her at this event, and it literally was like a light bulb moment for me. I realized in that moment, if she could do it, then I could do it. See, she was the first person that I had seen in real life that had gone through something bigger and scarier than what I was facing. And knowing that she could do it, and not only that she could do it, but I saw her and she was full of joy and peace and optimism for the future. And so I decided right then and there that I could get better and that I would get better. So I proceeded to try to find resources, try to find tools and support. Like I said, the support groups weren't a great place to find healing for me. So I began to read books and study and pray and good old trial and error. I just started to pay really radical attention to my mind, my heart, my emotions, and my physical body, and what things were helping and what things were not helping. I got radically in charge of my thoughts, radically in charge of my environment and the company I chose to keep, I started to be very selective about the things that I would let in order to heal and to be able to focus on the healing process. And thank goodness I started to feel better. I started to get back to life. I got my feet back underneath me. So much so that when a job opportunity in Florida opened up, see, I was born and raised in Minnesota, so all of this happened in Minnesota, and a job opportunity in Florida presented itself, and I had enough strength to decide to take that job. So my daughter Piper and I moved down to Florida, and we left behind my 20-year-old son, Quentin. Now, Quentin had struggled with drug use and abuse for all of his teenage years. From about age 13, we had walked through drug use and addiction with Quentin. It had been a form of adversity and grief all its own. I know all too well what it's like to be up at night not knowing if your child is alive or dead or what they're doing. I had to go through tough love and extreme boundaries with him throughout the course of those 7 years, but I had complete peace about the decision to move down to Florida and knew that this would be a fresh beginning for Piper and I to start over. And we were only there a month or so when Quentin called and said, Mom, I can't live life this way anymore. I just want to be healthy and sober and with you and Piper. Can I move down to Florida? So I said, absolutely, come down. I really hoped and believed that this would be the one thing that would finally give him a fresh start in life as well. And so we started to make arrangements and plans and preparations for him to join us down in Florida. He gave his notice at his work and started to make plans to come down. We were speaking every day at that time, and he was so future thinking, forward thinking. He was so excited to moving down to Florida and getting a fresh start. He was set to come down the end of July of 2018, and his family up in Minnesota gave him a going away party 4th of July weekend. Unfortunately, I received a call on July 8th letting me know that he had passed away of a drug overdose the night before. Actually, the phone call was from his best friend letting me know that somebody had posted on social media, "Rest in peace, gone too soon." As you can imagine, I don't know if you can imagine, but the air in that moment, the air left my lungs. I couldn't breathe and I fell to my knees. I called my sister and tried for what seemed like an eternity to get the words out of my mouth. It took us 2.5 hours of scrambling and making phone calls to actually have it confirmed that he did in fact die of a drug overdose the night before. So their grief was again large and looming and wanting to sweep me out to sea a second time. See, but I had learned from the loss of my mom what to do and what not to do. I had learned what are the traps that can sap your energy and take your time. I had learned about the things that are not helpful when you're dealing with grief. And so my recovery process of grieving my son was significantly shorter, was significantly more efficient. And it was then that I realized that this is a skill set that can be learned. There are tools that can actually help people move through grief and recover. And people need to know about it. And so what I'm going to share with you for the duration of the call is the framework that I have developed, learned, and put in place to help other people find, not just get through grief, but find complete healing, recovery, and to make their life actually better in the long run than for whatever loss. Now, you may or may not have lost someone you love, but we grieve in all kinds of situations. Actually, grief shows up in our lives whenever our expectation and the reality don't match. That's where grief exists. So it could be around a relationship, a divorce, a job loss. It could even be a relatively good change. I know so many parents who pray and dream and hope to have kids, and then when they actually have kids and the reality of what that is and sleepless nights, there's a gap there between what you thought it was and what it actually is. And this process is really designed to help remove that gap or let you adapt and embrace the reality as it is, as opposed to what your expectation is. So it's a 5-step framework, and I go greatly in depth in each of the 5 steps, and there's a lot of exercises, there's a lot of information in each of the 5 steps when I work with clients one-on-one or in my mastermind groups. But for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to take you through all 5 steps. I'm going to give you an overview of each of the 5 steps, and I'm going to give you one application for each area. So you're going to have one thing that you're going to be able to walk away with each of the 5 steps to implement today, or to answer today, or to remove today. We're going to make sure that you walk away with at least one action item for each of the 5 steps. So let's get started. Okay. Step 1. Now, step 1 is the most important step. That's why it's step number 1, because you actually can't do the other steps until you've done this first step. So I want to encourage you to really take your time, maybe go back and rewatch this video, or take really good notes during here. And these are questions that you can ask yourself later and work through later. But step 1 is so foundational and so important. And it also is the step that most people don't do. They just skip, because step 1 is establishing your framework. And it's really made up of 3 parts. So the first part is, what do you believe? You need to take an inventory and you need to take stock of your beliefs around this particular situation or loss. So there's a whole bunch of things that you might be believing, and they may be true or they may not be true. But the question is, have you ever thought and reflected on your beliefs? Have you ever taken the time to consider, why do I believe that? Or who told me that? Or what situation in my life, like when did I start believing that and why? And does that belief really serve me? Do you ever take time to think about what you're thinking about? So that is step 1, taking a look at what are your beliefs around this particular loss or adversity or whatever, and do those beliefs serve you? The second piece of the framework is identifying what you want. What do you want? This awful thing has happened, or you've experienced this loss. What do you want life to look like going forward? So some of the examples for people that have lost a loved one that we unpack in greater detail in some of my courses and one-on-one work is, though, do you want answers? Has something happened and it's left your mind just wondering how that even happened? And are you consumed with wanting answers? Do you want to know the why of something? Is that what's keeping you up at night? Do you want justice? Do you want vengeance? Do you want sympathy? I mean, that's one that honestly keeps people stuck, especially in our society today. Everyone is waving their flag, explaining why they're damaged or broken or what bad thing happened to them, and trying to demand that the rest of the world treat them, a little differently, and everybody walk on eggshells around them. Now, I'm not saying that hard times aren't hard times and that you shouldn't get love and support from those around you. You absolutely should. But it is a trap that you can slip over into the sympathy becoming your aim, sympathy becoming your identity. And so that's one of the things you want to look at. So what do you want? I hope one of the options is, for the record, if you don't know, one of the options is to want peace and joy and an amazing life. And I help people, if that's what you want, we're going to help you build a roadmap to get there. But just to review again, we're going to take a look at what do you believe, what do you want, and then the last thing is, who's your example? It is so incredibly hard for us as humans and for our minds to wrap our head around and reach for something that we haven't seen done by somebody else. But as soon as we can see an example of someone else who's done it, we can get there so much faster. So in my life, Immaculate is that example. I can't honestly tell you where I would be if I had never heard her speak at that conference that day. She was the living example for me of someone who did move through horrific grief, trauma, and tragedy and come out on the other side. I'm so thankful for her example in my life, and there are not enough of them around, but they are out there. So you're going to determine, what do you believe, what do you want, and who is your example. I encourage you, if you don't have an example of someone right in your immediate circle who's walking in victory or who's gone through a tough time and has overcome it, certainly that's what I hope to be for people in my role, but I guarantee they're out there. Just be looking for them intentionally, because you need these 3 things, this framework, in order to move forward through the rest of the steps. So that is step 1. Step 2 and 3, now that we have our framework, is going to be all about protecting the framework. How do you protect it? How do you safeguard it? How do you nurture it in your own life, in your own mind? And so step 2 is about protecting your framework from external influences. Now, external influences can come from all sorts of places. It can come from TV, radio, music, movies, social media. It can be friends and coworkers, really the books you're reading. Anything that is coming into your mind that you're reading, you're seeing with your eyes, you're hearing with your ears, you're even around people's space. So you're going to, again, do an audit and an inventory of what are all the things around you that could be affecting your healing, either helping or hurting it. One of the analogies that I like to use when you experience significant hardship or loss, it's like you were in a major car accident. And so you need to treat yourself the same way. You've been through an extreme trauma, and you need to be very diligent to give yourself time and rest and space to heal and recover, and to be very careful about your surroundings. If you were, in a hospital, they wouldn't let a lot of dirt and unsanitary situations come into the hospital because they know that it's such a sensitive time and the body needs to be safeguarded for healing. Well, it is the same way with your mind and heart after you've experienced loss and hardship. And so you are responsible. You're actually the only one that's in charge of what you let come into your life. So, as I mentioned, there's TV, there's movies, there's social media, there's people, there's books that you're reading. You need to take a look at all of those things and decide case by case if those things are helpful for you or hurtful to you. And some things you may just need to remove for a season when you're in the healing process. And then some things you'll find you'll remove permanently. So I'll give you an example of that. And one example that's very common for people who have lost someone to suicide or overdose or some sort of traumatic circumstances is to completely avoid, movies and TV shows that have those kinds of scenes, because that can be traumatizing for you. See, what I've learned about our brains is that whether you're just imagining something or if it's happening in real life, your brain doesn't know the difference of that. Our brains are incredibly powerful. So the more that you're triggered, for lack of a better word, or you relive those traumatic moments, you're actually wiring that trauma back into your body. So you want to be very careful to not watch shows or movies or anything that is going to trigger those memories for you. So I personally don't watch, I don't watch any of the medical drama shows because almost every episode involves death and dying, One show that I will never watch again as long as I live is Intervention. I don't know if you're familiar with that show, but I believe it's on E or A&E. But it's a show about people who are drug addicts and families doing interventions and trying to get them help. And I used to watch that show all the time. And honestly, with my son going through his addiction, part of me watched it because at the time, most of the cases on that show were in worse condition than my son. And because I could relate to those families and their hardship, I used to watch that show all the time. But I know now for me, I will never watch that show again because it just won't be helpful. If they do the intervention and the person ends up getting help and getting well, it's just going to be a painful reminder for me that my son didn't grab hold of that opportunity and get healing for himself. And God forbid if the person should pass away on the show, which does happen time to time, then it's just a painful reminder for me that I did lose my son and the loss I experienced. So that is a show for me that is permanently on my do not watch list. So hopefully, as you take inventory for yourself, you're going to have things that you don't watch. Now, it's half about removing the negative things, but it's also about putting in the positive things. So across the board, TV, music, books, social media, people, what are the things that help you to feel better? What are the things that help brighten your mood or lift your mood? Watch a stand-up comedian, watch a comedy, watch things that are going to have you laugh. Laughter is so medicinal. It does so many wonderful things for your health and your body and restoring your heart and mind. I know a lot of people, they feel like it's almost wrong if they're going to laugh in the middle of grief or after losing someone they love. But can I just tell you, that's a lie. That is a lie. That is not true. And laughter is great medicine for you, and not just medicine for your soul, but neurologically speaking and the hormonal balance in your body, laughter does great things all across the board. So that is step 2, how to protect this framework that we established from external influences. But now we want to talk about step 3, which is protecting the framework from your own thoughts, your own thinking and emotions. I know, especially as it relates to grief can come in and be so overwhelming, especially emotionally. The sorrow, the sadness, it can range from feeling heavy to feeling like a sharp pain. It can feel like panic washes over you. There's so many forms and varieties of grief that can show up on your doorstep. And that's why it's imperative to have your framework established, because that is our tool for fighting back. That is how we're going to deflect and deal with the times when our emotions feel overwhelming. So I'll give you a very practical example of this. So my framework when Quentin passed away, my son's name was Quentin. My framework when Quentin passed away was that he is not gone. He's just not here. I will see him again, and we will spend all of eternity together. So those were some of the beliefs that I analyzed back in step 1. When I sat down and reflected about what I believe about the situation, those were the 4 core statements that I came up with and meditated on and held fast to. And so that's why step 1 is so important, and you need to take a lot of time with that and be very solid in that, and you need to reinforce that for yourself. I encourage folks that I work with to write it down on note cards, have it available in your purse, on your mirror, in your bathroom. That should become second nature to you. You should have that memorized, because here in step 3, when your own thoughts or your emotions can seem overwhelming, when it feels like you can't have control, that framework is going to be the thing to help you get control. So I'll tell you an example in my life, and when I really realized the power of this. It was about a month and a half after my son had passed away, and I'll never forget, I was driving home from work, and all of a sudden this panicked feeling came over me, and all I could hear in my head was, he's gone, he's gone, he's gone. And to the point that I started hyperventilating. I was driving my car, and I was worried that I was going to get in an accident. My vision was getting blurry. I was hyperventilating. It was a panic attack, I'm imagining. I don't suffer from panic attacks, but I imagine that's what it would feel like. And with everything in me, I gripped the steering wheel and I said back out loud, he is not gone. He's just not here. I will see him again, and we will have all of eternity to spend together. And the instant I said that, it left. The feelings of panic, the overwhelming anxiety left my body in that instant. And that is when I realized the power of this, of that we actually can take thoughts captive. We actually can dictate how things are going to move forward. And so that is step 3. That's an example of step 3. Now, it isn't something that happens instantaneously. It is a skill that needs to be practiced and developed, and muscles that need to be developed, just like anything else that you do. But the important and positive thing is that the more you do it, the easier it becomes. That's why establishing a framework in step 1 and repeating it every day and having it around us is so important, because you'll find that over time, you're actually conditioning your brain, you're training your brain on how to respond. So once you do that long enough, when you start to feel overwhelming feelings, your brain automatically, without you even having to make a conscious choice, your brain is going to kick in and repeat back the framework. And that is the power of this. You know, we've learned that anything repeated in repetition more than 21 days actually moves from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. It is the time cycle for beginning to develop a new habit. And then when you repeat that cycle another two times, so for a total of 63 days, that is firmly ingrained. You have created very well-established pathways, neurological pathways. And so that is going to become automatic for you. So I just want to encourage you that no matter how you're feeling today, no matter how long you have been struggling with, whatever it is, no matter how recent or how old this trauma or tragedy or a loss has happened in your life, you can respond differently. You can train your brain to make a different choice and to respond differently. And over time, your brain actually will comply. Turns out we're in charge of our thoughts and we can control them. So that is step 3. Now let's move right on to step 4. Step 4 is all about community. Community is so vital. We were not meant to do life alone. We were built for community. We were designed to be interdependent and to relate to one another and love one another and share each other's hardships and laugh and cry together. Community is such an important part of healing. But what I try to teach people is that not all community is created equal. And so you need to be very diligent in the type of community that you choose to surround yourself with. So let's go back to the suicide support group example that I went to. If I would have stayed in that group and embraced that group as my community, I probably would still be very stuck today. You are who you surround yourself with. And it's not just about the people, but it's about their mentality and what they're striving for. So again, that's why it's so important to create your framework and have a solid grasp on it for yourself, because it's really important that you find community that is in alignment with that. The example that I like to give is that, if you were trying to lose weight, for example, it wouldn't be productive for you to go every Tuesday night and hang out with several other people who are overweight and then eat pizza and talk about how it's impossible to lose weight. That would not be a good use of your time. If you've decided that you want to get healthy and lose weight, you need to find people who have victory in that area. You need to learn from them. You need to grow with them. You need to develop their habits. You need to be surrounded by them. So go find community. This work is greatly accelerated when you find community, but it's the right community, not just any community, the right community. And that's why I'm so thankful for online summits and online communities like this, because if you can't find community right in your own town, if you can't find the type of people who are going after the type of things you're going after, then find them online, find them wherever. But it is your responsibility to find the right community. But I'm here to tell you that when you find them, your growth is going to be accelerated. So I wrote down some questions that you can ask yourself when you see community to determine if it's a good community for you and for your growth and for your healing. So when you go and visit a group, the question is, how do you feel when you leave? When you go and engage with people, and especially if you're talking about something hard or difficult, when you leave, how do you feel? Do you feel lighter or do you feel heavier? That's a big indication whether that's a good place for you to be. How long have people in the group been coming to the group? So especially if it's a divorce care or if it's, a grief group, if there are people in there who've been coming for 10 years and they're still the same way, that is a huge red flag to run from that group. And that leads into the next question. How long do they expect you to stay? Some of the best groups, I love the groups that are formatted to be 6 months to a year long, that you all come together, you're all intentional about getting healing and supporting one another, but that there's the beginning, middle, and end to the process, that you're all committed to moving through a process together, and there should be an end. There should be a culmination. There should be a point where you say, okay, I have healed from this. It's not to say that it won't ever come up again or you won't ever have a sad day, but that you have moved through the process and you have moved forward. So that's another thing to ask for community. Is there anyone there that's walking in victory? And especially whoever is the leader or facilitator of the group, you need to look at their lives and are they walking in victory? Are they able to lead others into victory? Because if they're not, that is only going to slow you down or, God forbid, keep you stuck in a place of hurt, pain, and trauma. So remember, these are all things that are your responsibility and within your control. These are all things that are going to help you move through it quickly and efficiently or slowly or even get stuck. One of the things I often say to people is that trauma is not your fault, but healing is your responsibility. You need to be radically responsible and learn to exercise radical self-care and boundaries in order to move through any loss or adversity and come out the other side. But that leads us to step 5. We are already, and I'm going to take a sip of my coffee, but we are already at step 5. Step 5 is my favorite. Well, step 1 is my favorite, but step 5 is really where the magic happens. Step 5 is finding a purpose for your pain. This is where that awful thing becomes a good thing. This is where adversity turns into advantage. This is where you're moving forward on purpose, but also in purpose. See, I believe that nothing that happens to you, either good or bad, is meant for just you alone. It's always meant to help somebody else. And so there's a couple different ways that you can find a purpose in your pain. There are ways that it's purposeful for you as an individual internally, and then there are also ways that you can make it purposeful externally. So I'm just going to quickly go over both of those categories. So internally, I mean, all the things that we've been talking about today, if you're learning these skills, they're going to make you a more self-aware, emotionally healthy person in all aspects of life. If you can master the thought control, if you can control your thoughts in the midst of grief, then you can control your thoughts in the midst of a breakup or in the midst of a meeting. These are all skills that if you're learning, especially as you're walking through grief or hardship, they're going to serve you so well the rest of your life. If you can learn to be more discerning about your community and what you're putting in, what TV you're watching, what books you're reading, who you're surrounding yourself with, all of those things are going to make you a more productive, a more successful, a more well-rounded person. Not only that, but once you've been through hardship, have you ever come across people and they haven't really had anything bad happen to them one way or another, and they're just sort of clueless, they just don't get it, or they're just not able to relate or empathize. Whatever it is that you've gone through, that has made you a stronger person. You have built muscles that you didn't even know you had or needed, and it's made you stronger. It's most likely given you clarity. That is some of the biggest gifts that I've received out of, losing my mom. And really, when I lost my son, I just had a crystal clarity about who I am, why I was put on this earth, what I want to do for the rest of my life, and how I want to make an impact. And there are people who go through their entire lives without ever having that kind of clarity. So that could very well be one of the purposes for your pain. When you look back, has it helped you identify who you are, or what you want to do professionally, or how you want to contribute to the world, or how you want to show up in relationships? I can tell you, as tragic as it is, I am a better mom to my daughter Piper because of the loss of my son. Now, I wish it didn't take the loss of my son, or I wish I still had him here as well, but I'm a much more present mom to my daughter Piper because of it. That's one of the purposes. That's one of the ways that I'm actually enriched by this whole experience. And those are available to you too. So you want to look at internally and in your own individual life, what are the purposes for this situation? But then my hope is that you'll take those improvements in yourself, your ability to be more empathetic, your ability to be more caring, your radical clarity about what you want to contribute to the world, and you want to create those in an external way. And that can be something so small, or it can be something huge. I actually started a nonprofit in honor of my son. It's called Q's Army, and we help families that have lost loved ones to overdose. And I'm a praying person and a prayerful person, and I asked within days after he passed away, I asked the Lord for 300,000 lives. I asked, because of this loss of one life, I asked that 300,000 lives would be impacted for good. And that was the beginning of what is now Q's Army. It's a nonprofit organization, and we just help families who've lost loved ones to overdose. We just love on them, give them tools and resources, give them a place to feel accepted and to process through their grief. And that would have never happened. I actually wrote a book. I wrote a book called You're Not Crazy, You're Grieving. And none of these things would have happened had I not gone through those things. So your purpose, your external purpose, can be something huge. It can be something small. Now because of the loss I've been through, I'm able to relate to other parents who've lost their kids in a way I never could before. You get some sort of authority. Once you've been through something, you now can speak knowingly to someone who's going through that exact same thing. So I don't care what it is, if it's job loss or bankruptcy or divorce or, losing a parent or a child, you now are uniquely qualified to relate, empathize, and support people who are going through that same thing because you get it, because you've been there. And so it can be just being a better friend for people, more available to listen and be present and empathize with them in a way that other people can't. Another thing that you might do is speak, share your story. Our stories are so powerful. I am so thankful that Immaculée shares her story, that she chose to share her story, and her sharing her story. That's all I saw was her speaking on stage one day. And it was the thing that set me free. It was the thing that put me on the trajectory that I'm on right now. So I'm so thankful for her sharing. What if she decided not to share her story? So that's another purpose for your pain. You can choose to share your story. And again, that can be on a small scale or a large scale, but do not minimize the power of your story. Do not minimize the power of your testimony and what you've been through. I hope and pray that you're blessed and encouraged by me sharing my story, but I guarantee you that your story has unique components that other people are struggling with. There are other people in the world looking for an example. They're looking for someone they can relate to. They're looking for someone who's been through a hardship so that they can find the courage to get through theirs, and it may be your story. So share it. Write a book, speak, whatever that looks like. Do some videos, whatever, but that might be another way that you externally use your pain for a higher purpose. So this, my friends, is the high level. That is the culmination of our 5-step framework in the Advancing Through Adversity course. And obviously, like I said, each step goes quite a bit deeper and has a lot more information and a lot more exercises and practical tools. But I wanted